Good afternoon and welcome to this month's presentation of Special Topics in English Learner Programming. This monthly webinar is dedicated to English Learner Family Engagement Practices. Once again, I would like to welcome you to this month's installment of Special Topics in English Learner Programming. This is your monthly webinar for July 2019, and our topic for today is English Learner Family Engagement Practices. My name is Anika Harris. I'm the Professional Development Specialist at Aussie who focuses on English language acquisition, K through 12, and I will be your host this afternoon. As many of you know, this series is broadcast every month, and we cover topics pertaining to ELs from their instruction to the administrative side of running an EL program and everything in between. Today we will focus on the federal education policy, which provides that family engagement is an activity that is meaningful and culturally respectful, and it fosters students' learning and development. So, research has shown that LEAs with successful EL family engagement initiatives do focus on building the capacity of both families and staff to create home-to-school partnerships that support students in a systemic manner. Today you'll have an opportunity to reflect on your LEA's practice of engaging families of English learners, and we'll also set aside time to think through considerations for planning engagement in the upcoming school year for families of ELs. During this hour, you'll have a chance to examine and identify weaknesses in your LEA's current family engagement practices with a special focus on families of English learners. You will also have an opportunity to learn family engagement practices designed for families of ELs and aligned with federal and state policy. And towards the end, we'll create a space to think about planning a continuous EL family engagement program at your LEA that leads to improved EL academic achievement. This webinar has been designed to be interactive. We'll be using the chat box to communicate with each other a lot. Today, I'm going to encourage you to use the chat box to reach out to each other, not just to me and not just to respond to questions that I might ask, but it's absolutely okay if you want to have side conversations via the chat box with other attendees, because you may learn of practices they do that you want to do. You may ask how they're doing what they're doing, or ideas to overcome some challenges and barriers to family engagement. So go ahead and have those side conversations via the chat box, in addition to using the box to engage with this presentation. So we'll start the webinar by reflecting on what you currently do at your LEA and what your LEA as a whole does to engage families of English learners. To get you in the mode of thinking about your reflection, let's examine what the research says about creating a well-founded relationship between a family and school. Research shows that a well-founded relationship between a family and a school is a key component of student success. Related specifically to English learners, research shows that this relationship should be based on understanding and respecting how families support their EL students' learning. And research shows that a well-founded relationship between a family and a school is created when families have a voice in establishing the school's vision for family engagement. So that's some food for thought, and these are key points, particularly bullet 2 and 3, that may be new to some listeners or may get overlooked at the LEA level. Here at OSSI, we have developed a tool to assist LEAs with thinking through how robust and well-rounded their EL program really is. It's a planning document called the School Readiness Reflection Tool, and it's found in Appendix E of our document, Delivering Education Services to English Learners. The document can be accessed via the link that appears at the bottom of this slide. And if you're participating today, you will get a copy of the slides and you'll be able to access that link for yourself. So this tool. The tool has several sections, each dedicated to a different topic on EL programming. Section 15 is about the LEA's EL Family Engagement Program. So we're going to look at the 5 statements in that section, and you'll just reflect silently to see if your LEA has aligned its EL Family Engagement Program with what the state and federal provisions are. Here they are. So you see within Area 15, communication and relationships with parents of ELs. There are the 5 sections. First, thinking about the language that parents understand and how well your LEA communicates information with those families. And then thinking about the procedures and systems that the LEA has to provide language support to families if they need it. Then there's an expectation that LEAs will conduct outreach to engage all families, including families of English learners, in regular school functions and meetings. Is your LEA providing training opportunities to parents of English learners to increase their participation in their children's education? And another question you can ask is if your LEA is keeping records of all the activities it does related to EL parent involvement. So in using this tool, you see a snapshot, but not the full page of the document. In this snapshot, you see that you can rate your LEA with 3 points for yes, we're doing this with fidelity, 2 points if you're doing it, but we still have some work to make this area stronger, or you can give yourself 1 point if you're not there yet and you're not in progress, but you know this is something you really need to work on. So the tool is designed for you to rank yourself in the sub areas, and you can tally up all of your points at the end of the document. But what you don't see is this tool also allows you to write in and think through with the team at your LEA who is going to partner together to get us from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3. Is it going to be the principal, the EL coordinator? Do I need to rope in the student support services person, classroom teachers, or even families? So there's space to document who will help you develop this area more fully. And there's also space for you to create a timeline of the steps that need to be done to get you up to a 3 or to maintain that 3. So I encourage you over the summer to take a look at the School Readiness Reflection Tool and start documenting how well developed your EL program is. We're going to use this tool, which is based on federal policy and it's tailored to our DC education community. We're going to use this today as a springboard for our topic. In the first two sub-areas, you may have noticed there's mention of language support, providing communication in a language that families can understand, interpreting, and translating. And that's emphasized because communication is, as it says here on the slide, at the heart of family engagement. When communicating with families, the LEA is expressing itself, the families are listening and receiving the information. The families hopefully are expressing themselves, and the LEA is listening or receiving that information. So communication, when it comes to family engagement, is made up of 4 domains: listening and reading, which are how we receive information, speaking and writing, which are how we express the information. To engage families, we need to use all of those domains. And if you think about it, DC is a very linguistically diverse city. It can be a challenge to communicate with all families at your LEA, so it requires intentional, proactive planning to overcome those hurdles. And I mentioned that the city is linguistically diverse. We see from our 2017-2018 school year data that English learners in our city speak 89 different languages. The most commonly spoken outside of the English language are listed here on this slide. So there are 5 that you see, but it means that there are 84 other languages that are not listed here. So the summertime is usually a really good time to start thinking about what happens if you have a student whose family and the student are coming to you with very limited English ability, but do communicate in a language not listed here. Are you prepared to support them? What resources do you have, and what resources do you need to get right now so that you can make interaction with that family successful? Creating a welcoming environment is one of the first steps to engaging families. If they're put off because people at the school don't seem friendly, no one is welcoming them, staff are welcoming other families and not welcoming them, they are told that information cannot be provided to them, or simply, I don't speak your language, so I'm sorry, is very off-putting and is one strike against having a well-rounded EL family engagement program. So we're going to look at 2 scenarios and consider which scenario best reflects a welcoming environment. Scenario A. In scenario A, the LEA does have a process to identify what we call limited English proficient parents. That's a federal term, and I'll refer to them as LEP parents for the rest of the presentation. Note that LEP parents may be parents of your English learner students, but some students who are not ELs may also have LEP parents. Just food for thought. So with this LEA, they do have a process to identify LEP parents. The process has revealed that there are some families who will need support in Spanish, Amharic, and French during the school year. Accordingly, the LEA has developed processes to provide language support in those 3 languages, And that will make sure that families have the same access to information as their native English-speaking families. We also have the next LEA scenario, which is B, and this LEA has also a process to identify LEP parents. The process reveals that the families will need support in Spanish, Amharic, and French. This LEA has not developed processes to provide language support in Amharic or French, so it offers support to families who communicate in Spanish only. All right, so the first question that I'll ask you to respond to in the chat box is, which LEA, A or B, is creating a welcoming environment through their efforts to support families who communicate in a language other than English? Please go ahead and type either A or B into the chat box. And the next question is, what might the barriers be to providing language support in Amharic or French for the LEA in scenario B? Why is it that LEA in scenario B isn't providing support in Amharic or French? So the LEA in scenario B is doing something. They are doing something in two ways that we see here. One way is they've got a process to identify who is an LEP parent. And that's more than some LEAs do. But it's a process that should be done, and they're doing it. The second thing that they're doing is they're offering language support to families who communicate in Spanish. But unlike LEA A in the scenario A, which is creating the most welcoming environment of the two scenarios, the LEA in scenario B has not provided language support to all of the families who need it. So the Amharic and French speakers are excluded. One idea, and it's a common assumption, is the families that come into our schools who their primary language is Amharic or French, they speak some English and they're not in dire need of support. So we can get away with not doing it, offering them support. We're sort of going to slide. In addition to the fact that language support is not as readily available in Amharic or French. So if a LEA can sort of slide by with not offering that support under the pretext that, yeah, we can sort of kind of communicate with those families so they don't need it, the request isn't as urgent, we will do so. And that's an attitude and a behavior to be avoided as much as possible. Just like Spanish-speaking families, if a family requests or has the need for language support, the school should be doing its best to provide that support. And we'll look a little bit more at what support looks like. But to be welcoming to all means to be welcoming to all. So use your resources or find your resources to be able to provide language support to all of those who need it. So in reflecting, we'll use the reflection tool, sub-area 1 under family engagement, and we'll think about this statement in sub-area 1, which says, the school provides information about programs, services, and/or activities in a language parents understand as much as possible. How is your LEA doing that? The LEAs on the last slide in those last two scenarios had processes, but what are your processes? How do you know who needs language support? In some cases, schools may attempt to profile families based on a last name or a look, or profile based on language that they've heard families use in the school building to determine who needs support. But that's not really an accurate way to figure out who needs support. Why not go directly to the families and find out what their language support needs are? That makes the most sense, and families can tell you if they need it or if they don't. And if they don't, respect that. So that information can be acquired through direct questioning face-to-face. It can be also acquired via a survey or a question on another enrollment form, for example. Or perhaps you have a parent orientation, and part of the orientation is to have families fill out a piece of paper indicating whether they need language support, do they need it in writing, or do they need support with oral communication, and in what language. And then you take that information, but who do you share it with? It's one thing to just have it, but it's another thing to think through who needs to know this information and what else do you do with that information. So there are no hard and fast rules that will be shared right now. We'll do some planning towards the end of this presentation. Choose the correct answer. So in this slide, you will have the opportunity to look at a statement and then select if the word must or the word should is the correct answer to be used. And you see the statement here says appropriate and competent translators or interpreters must or should have proficiency in target languages, ease of written and oral expression, knowledge of specialized terms or concepts, as well as be trained in their role, the ethics of interpreting and translating, and the need for confidentiality. Which is the correct answer? Should this statement use the word must or should? Go ahead and use the chat box to respond. And you can see the answer is provided below for you. The word in this statement is should. It is burdensome for many LEAs to have a mandate upon them that they have competent translators with all of these characteristics. However, LEAs should strive to have interpreters and translators with these characteristics as much as is feasible. A little bit later on, we'll look at a definition of appropriate and competent translators and interpreters so that you will know how to plan accordingly. In subsection 2 of the reflection tool, under family engagement, we have this statement. The school has procedures and systems in place to provide interpreters for parents if needed and or requested. So again, we talked about the processes to know if the families need language support, but then what does the support look like at your LEA? When is translation needed and when is interpretation needed? I put these words in quotation marks because they're often used interchangeably when in fact translation has a specific meaning and interpretation has a specific meaning. If you're new to the role or if you're new to language support, please know that translation is written support. So writing, going from one language to another in writing, that's translation. Going from one language to another orally, right, with spoken communication is interpretation. And why it matters is this. If you are looking for support, and let's say you reach out to a company that does language support for schools, and you say, I need a translator in Serbian, and the company will ask, what date, what time do you need the translation by? Because they're trying to fill your request. And they will also ask what language, and they will also ask, how many pages is your document? And you get a little bit surprised because you don't have a document. Yet what you did was ask them for translation, and being a professional language support service, they correctly assumed you needed support with something in writing. So please be careful when using the words translation and interpretation because they mean two different, related but different things. So you can also reflect upon, you can also reflect upon who's providing the language support. Are they qualified? And we'll look at that definition of qualified. Do they have the requisite language proficiency to be able to communicate for the need, right? If it's an IEP meeting, do they know the terminology of special education and IEPs? If it's a health matter, do they have that vocabulary to speak and to understand what's being communicated? And budget is also very important. Many times we try to get language support in-house, but if you do have someone who is one of the 84 languages not listed, Serbian, Bosnian, Yoruba, etc., you might need to spend some money to be able to supply them with the support they need. So another question out there for you is true or false? And it's not a question, it's a statement. State education agencies like OSSI and LEAs, like where you work, they have an obligation to communicate meaningfully with parents, limited English proficient parents, and to notify those parents adequately of information about any program, service, or activity called to the attention of non-LEP parents. Is this statement true or false? It's true. So we here at OSSI and you in your roles have an obligation to do this. And if we're not doing it, we're out of compliance with regulations that apply to education settings. So beyond providing language support, there's also the engagement piece, like the actual content. And in the tool, the reflection tool, sub-area 3 says, the school conducts outreach to engage parents of ELs in regular school functions and meetings. So you want to think, at this time, how has your LEA been ensuring that it reaches out to parents of English learners? By flyers? By nothing? Going up to parents at drop-off and dismissal, phone calls, emails? How do you do that currently? And what school functions and meetings are parents of ELs invited to? How well are parents of ELs attending these school functions and meetings? And is your outreach working? So just questions for reflection. In sub-area 4, we see the statement, the school provides training opportunities to parents of English learners specifically to increase their participation in their children's education. Is your LEA doing that, and what do those opportunities look like? Also consider if you currently have an opportunity at your LEA to help families increase their participation in their children's English language development. So not just the academics, but also in fostering their English development. And how well attended are the opportunities? Do you think maybe you need to mix it up or do something different? Sub-area 5 covers record keeping. And previously we've asked about outreach and the actual activities, and in asking those questions, I've had you think through how well attended are those opportunities, and is the outreach working? Are you actually engaging the families? You won't know this unless you do some record keeping. You can use the record keeping, the records of attendance and your outreach efforts to evaluate your activities. Do you do that though? And if so, how are you doing it and when? Once in a while? Casually? Do you have a formal evaluation system, like time actually dedicated to knowing if your EL family engagement program is achieving its mission? Again, there are federal provisions around engaging the parents of ELs, and we'll look at where in the law you can find this. So it's not something that should be an afterthought, it's actually something that should be done. So in planning for the coming school year, we'll use the reflection tool and those 5 sub-areas again, starting with the 2 sub-areas that cover language support. So that's where we are. Sub-area 1 wants to help you ensure that you are disseminating school-related information to parents of ELs. There's a lot of school-related information. So what school-related information do parents of English learners need to participate in their child's education? Have you considered these? It's a large number within this shaded box. Have they received a parent notification letter that explains their child's placement in the EL program and what the EL program is? Do parents know they have a choice of school, not just the school that their cousin is going to or that a neighbor told them about? Do they understand the report cards? And on here is also the student discipline policies. Discipline looks different, school discipline looks different in other countries compared to the way it plays out here in the United States. And so students who have experienced schooling in other countries and then come here may engage in behaviors that are acceptable and the norm where they came from, but are not normal here. And then the students don't necessarily understand why they got in trouble. And or the families don't necessarily understand why their child got in trouble. So if student discipline policies aren't shared with students and families and are not shared in a language that audience can understand, discipline issues will continue when in fact they didn't need to keep going had adequate communication been provided. Some schools and LEAs offer GT, Gifted and Talented programs, or advanced placement courses, or may have IB programs. And those are programs that should recruit or do some testing in the case of gifted and talented for English learners, just like they do with other students. And parents should be apprised of what those programs are and that their child can participate. I'm also going to call out here grievance procedures, which is towards the bottom of this box. And I mention that because parents who have had schooling or may not have had schooling in their home country, if they were born outside of the United States, may have a different experience complaining about what happens at school. I know when I went to school outside of the US, I was told that I need to be careful if something goes wrong and I wanted to complain. I needed not to tell the person who I was complaining about. I couldn't go to them directly. I needed to go to someone else, and someone else would casually at the right time go to the person I was complaining about and express the grievance. So that was very different for me. In some countries, there's very direct confrontation that gets heated, and that's the norm. In some countries, you hold your grievance. In some countries, you hold your grievance, and there is a designated time in the calendar year when the community gets together and air their grievances. So I mentioned grievance procedures as something that all families should know about and how to do. Otherwise, they have a right to the grievance and they don't know how to do it, so they're not accessing that. Okay, moving on. We're continuing with language support, and as you plan for the upcoming year, know that language assistance and who's providing the language assistance should be thought about very carefully. If you're using staff in-house, determine if they're trained and qualified to provide effective language assistance. Ideally, you can do this in-house. It's quicker, it's more cost-effective. You're using staff that parents and students are already familiar with, so you're breaking down the barrier of unfamiliarity. However, sometimes hiring or obtaining perhaps volunteers is necessary, so you would seek to obtain qualified interpreters and translators. That practice of obtaining outside interpreters and translators has a great benefit, and that is minimizing the impact to the regular duties of your LEA's bilingual staff. So if you're bilingual and your LEA knows you're bilingual, you probably experience being called out of your regular duty to translate or interpret a lot. And that takes away from what you can do. And it's sort of burdensome. So we're seeking to obtain people to help staff do their regular duties and reduce the burden upon them. There are also telephonic interpreting services that provide real-time interpreting so that you can have a three-way conversation outside of DCPS. That might be a fee for service for LEAs, but it's very quick and easy. And the languages that are often represented are numerous. There is something you may have heard of called the Language Access Act of 2004, which was amended in 2014, and it outlines who is covered by the Act and what their responsibilities are. DCPS, as a government agency entity, is automatically covered by the Act. In the case of private and charter schools, you would want to consult with your lead administrator to determine if you need to follow what is provided by the Act. For more information, I provided the link to the Office of Human Rights Language Access Portal. If you're not covered, but you want to see examples of what the practice of abiding by the Language Access Act looks like, you can certainly click the link and take a look. You might also see there cards, visual communication with families to let them know that language support is available, that you could use as an example or a model at your LEA. Another thing that you can find at the portal is a short list of some companies that offer language support. So if you're looking for translators or interpreters, you might find some leads by clicking the link there. It's important to know what is not okay when it comes to language support. And so here you can see the LEA may not use students, siblings, friends, or untrained staff to be translators or interpreters, even if those people are bilingual. And the reason should be pretty clear, that if you're communicating important information, you would want to communicate without errors. So untrained interpreters or translators are more prone to errors, and trained interpreters or translators are trained not to make those errors. There's also the issue of confidentiality. So students or siblings may not be able to maintain confidentiality, and the same goes with friends. There's also the issue of the specialized terms and concepts for the issue at hand that untrained people may not have the capacity to provide language support in those specialized terms or concepts. So when you're working with your administrators, or if you are an administrator, these are points to think through when it comes to developing a program of language support for your LEP families. And I will also say from experience, if you have casual understanding of a language, doesn't necessarily mean you can speak the language. If you can speak somewhat, doesn't necessarily mean you're a great listener. So we covered at the very beginning the 4 domains of communication. There are multiple areas that go into communicating in another language, and trained interpreters and translators can use those multiple domains effectively, whereas someone who is not trained may start sweating or shaking, looking uncomfortable, communicating with their body that they're uncomfortable. They may communicate the wrong information because they don't have the vocabulary or the phrasing. It may take a very long time, and that can be off-putting to the receiver of the information. An untrained person may also not understand what they're reading or what they're hearing, and so then the communication is not effective. So we've spent a long time in this webinar on language support, but it's an issue of concern among many LEAs here in DC that untrained people are being used to provide language support, and then the correct information is not being conveyed. So when it comes to outreach, we're looking here at the reflection tool, area 15, sub-area 3. And I wanted to point you to the law. We're looking at an ESSA update, and it calls out Title I of the Every Student Succeeds Act, but it's originally called the Elementary Secondary Education Act. And Title I now, under ESSA, requires LEAs to conduct effective outreach to parents of ELs, including regular meetings. And there's the section in the law that you can cite to or that you can research. So this mandate is achieved by creating a welcoming environment, an environment that welcomes families of different cultures. And I wanted to help you think through in your planning what the characteristics of a welcoming environment are. We know from families that a welcoming environment is when families see themselves. And the same goes for students. When students see themselves reflected in the school, they feel more welcome. Some ways to do this are by posting flags in the school building or classroom that represent where the families are from or their heritage. Photos of the country that families come from, photos of objects that are unique to those countries, animals, settings, etc. Books and lessons that reflect the culture and the values of families of English learners. And in lessons, one easy example is currency, where students can bring in currency. They can borrow it from their parents and talk about what the currency is and the illustrations in the currency, the letters used in the currency, but also thinking through counting in other countries. What fingers or what representations do you use to count? And it can be very engaging for students. And validating. Another way for families to see themselves and students to see themselves is in the faces of staff. Do you have in your staff people from the country or region where your EL students and their families are coming from? And so it's not necessarily a one-to-one match with the culture. As our superintendent mentioned here, Hansul Kang, who is the superintendent for the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. She mentioned today that she was a high school social studies teacher in New Mexico on a reservation, and the school served a Navajo community. And that one of her students mentioned, that he paid more attention to her and was more engaged with her because she was the first teacher of color that had come to teach at the school. And because he was of color and she was of color, he paid more attention. So it doesn't necessarily, again, have to be a one-to-one match, but seeing some sort of representation can be engaging in and of itself. And finally, school activities that reflect families and their cultures or traditions can be incorporated in the school environment. The Title I mandate that we looked at can also be achieved not just by creating a welcoming environment, but also making an effort to have a personal connection with families. And some ideas to do this are having a face-to-face interaction. Think again, drop-off dismissal, saying hi at that time, having parent-teacher meetings, emails, and phone calls that are personalized. And I think of it this way, when you're initiating personalized connections at the beginning of the year or when families first enroll their student, it's really great to have those communications, whether they be face-to-face or email or a phone call, That's just sort of getting to know you. Hi, I'm so-and-so at the LEA. I would like to introduce myself, and I'd like to get to know you better. And then, at a later point in time, have another series of personalized interactions via face-to-face or email or phone call communications that are positive about their child. And doing that before having to make that discipline outreach means that when and if you do have to have that difficult conversation, it's likely going to be received much better if you've made an effort to connect with families beforehand. Repeating efforts to get to know families really pays off. Some families are not really certain what your intentions are, or didn't expect to have contact with the staff. They just wanted to sort of send their kid and go. Or they just don't know how school in this country works. So they're not making an effort to reach out to you, but you would want to continue making efforts to reach out to them, even if it looks like they don't really want that communication. Again, when the parents need you or when you need them, the communication will be much easier and the payoff will be much greater. As we've said many times before, use language support if needed, and that's why you'll want to have those processes in place from the very beginning to find out which families need language support. Try to keep your interactions positive, and that's with everyone. And it's really cool if you can find some common ground. For example, if you have kids the same age as the families that are the family that you're interacting with, you can mention that, and that can be a conversation starter, an icebreaker. If one parent is wearing a t-shirt from an event that you went to or that you want to go to, why not engage over that and help to break the ice? So that's what finding common ground means. So we saw 2 ingredients to make it easier to conduct outreach of families of English learners and to sort of get them interested and make them feel comfortable enough to then come to the regular school functions and meetings. And those ingredients were creating a welcoming environment and making a personal connection. Another ingredient is spreading the message about the function or the meeting. So if families don't know that the event is taking place, they're not going to come. And if they hear from someone through the grapevine that the event happened and it's something they wanted to come to, they're sort of going to feel disappointed that they were not invited. So some LEAs will choose to have flyers, and the flyers are printed in the languages representing the languages spoken by the families. When you do so, be very strategic about the placement of the announcements and think about where your target families are congregating or where they tend to look, and then put the flyers there as opposed to deep inside the school where parents are not going to see them. Time the announcements so that families have enough time to plan to attend. Time the announcements so that your target families are going to hear or see the message. And it's really good to designate a point of contact if the family needs more information. Ideally, someone who speaks the language, if language support is needed, or someone who is known to have access to an interpreter or a translator or a telephonic interpreting service. And then at the event itself, know through your initial search into who is going to need language support, then make sure that those parents who are attending have the language support so that they can receive the message at the event and the function or the meeting is then successful and useful for them. So some other considerations are timing the event, knowing when families are most likely to attend, and maybe that requires polling or questioning families to find out what their availability is. And responding to barriers like timing, I work 2 or 3 jobs, or I work on the weekend, then respond by scheduling accordingly, or maybe having multiple meetings or multiple functions at different times or different days to accommodate those families. And the other item here is not just letting families know that school functions and meetings are happening, but also providing training to the families to help them participate in their children's education. When you're doing a parent training, there's something called one-way communication and two-way communication. I'll define those for you, but it's important to consider two-way communication because that's the formula that allows for more effective, respectful, and responsive information sharing. So one-way communication. Here's an example in the light blue box. Teacher is holding a parent-teacher meeting. The teacher explains the classroom rules and the consequences of the meeting. And then the teacher asks the parent, all right, any questions? It's all teacher-driven with no input from the family. In contrast, you have two-way communication where the same parent-teacher meeting is taking place, but the teacher has designed the event so that there's a conversation about classroom behavior expectations, and there's time built in to ask the parents what they think good behavior looks like in the classroom, and to ask what expectations the parents have for their child. So there's a two-way conversation happening. The teacher can also offer rules and consequences, and then the teacher and the parent co-plan how the child will follow the rules. And part of that co-planning includes what support and reinforcement the parent can offer at home. So it really is a two-way exchange, and it's much more productive and lets families know that you value them and conveys that parents are teachers of their children as well. Know that families may not understand the U.S. education system, so I provided some ideas on workshops here. Know that parents can come to workshops to learn how to support both their child's academic and their English language development. And some ideas for workshops are provided here. Finally, this reflection tool has mentioned that it's important to keep records of parent involvement activities, and here's why. If you're going to have a sustainable and continuous EL family engagement program at your LEA, it does require thoughtful planning, and planning can be more constructive when you've kept records to know what worked and what didn't. So ideas for planning to track engagement are provided here. Once you reflect on the record keeping, that reflection might reveal what's working and what's not, what scheduling is better and location is better, were there gaps in language support that need to be corrected, and what ideas or activities are families gravitating to. So as a next step, I would again encourage you to look at the School Readiness Reflection Tool, and the link is provided below, and look at Area 15 and start ranking yourself, and then plan out who can be involved to help you get to a 2 or a 3, and what timelines do you need to put in place to move up in your ranking. I want to thank you for joining me today. For those of you listening, you will get these slides so you can cover the information with your staff in more detail. I wanted to let you know that we have a full body and complement of staff here at ALSI in the Division of Teaching and Learning, and our contact information is provided here. We also have ways for you to learn about our upcoming training activities. For those of you who are LEA leaders, you probably get the LEA Look Forward. We also have an ALSI events calendar, and you'll be able to click on the link alsi.dc.gov/events to see what is coming up that you can register for. Resources pertaining to servicing English learners are found here. And when it comes to upcoming professional development, just like today, there is an upcoming webinar on the second Thursday of August, because these webinars happen the second Thursday of every month. The next webinar will likely be on supporting English learners in pre-K settings, so the link is live for you to register for that right now. The webinar will take place from 3 to 4 p.m. We have also invited Pearson to facilitate foundational SIOP training. So many of you have heard of SIOP. I encourage you to come out. It's a 3-day training at the beginning of August. You'll learn about the SIOP method and be able to implement it in part or in whole at your LEA. So that registration is live, and there are spaces still available for individuals or ideally groups of teachers from your LEA to come. And next week we will be setting up a link to register for the Language Rich Classroom on Friday, September 13th. That will be presented by Persida and William Himley, who are coming out of Pennsylvania. They'll be presenting on their book of the same name, and participants will receive the book to take home. It's a turnkey resource where you learn from the presentation, you get the book, and the next day you could implement the lessons to your English learners or your whole class at your LEA. So look out for that announcement. Registration's coming soon. And know that we have a new member of our team. Santiago Sanchez is our new multilingual specialist. If you're in a bilingual program, you have his contact information there. Dr. Jennifer Norton leads our English Learner Program team here at ALSI. And I'm Anika Harris. I'm more than welcome to receive your feedback. My contact information appears below. Thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to participate. We will be sending out a survey on this very webinar, and encourage you to fill it out and give us your feedback that way as well. Have a great afternoon.